because science can only understand what we actually observe in our world.
About a flat versus a round earth.
Like, it's not meant to be a scientific textbook.
This is disproving the Bible, or it's proving science, or the other way around.
There's somewhere you always have to take a step of faith. It's a really, really, really important question.
So I guess I'll start us out by saying my brother Tagg is with us today on the podcast, so I'm super excited to hear some of his input and questions. And he shared with me some of his questions, and I think that they're a little bit different than some of the stuff that we've heard from previous guests on the podcast. So I think that this is going to be fun, interesting, and yeah, I mean, I don't know, Luke, if you want to say anything before Tagg fires questions off, but...
Yeah, I'm glad you're here, Tagg, and I feel like even from back when Fern and I started talking about this, the idea is to get people who are just like either newer to or maybe aren't super, grown up, 1,000 church services or that kind of thing, to like ask authentic questions. So I'm glad to have you, and I feel like you'll have a good...
Yeah, thank you. I try to keep up to date with most of the podcasts, and I was trying to pick some different topics that I haven't heard much or that I'm curious about. So with that being said, one of my first things that I was questioning was I always see stuff online about a flat versus a round earth, and I wanted to know what the Bible has to say about that. Is there anything?
It's great. It's a great question. In my head, Tagg, for the record, I haven't seen these questions before yet, which I kind of like because I feel like then it seems a little bit more authentic. There's like I'm not hesitating because I don't have an answer. I'm hesitating because I'm trying to decide whether to start with the smaller answer or the longer answer. But I think we'll just go a longer answer, and feel free to ask questions if you have them. We might have touched on this on a piece of what I'm about to say on a different podcast, but one of the nuances about the Bible is that it's not meant to be a scientific textbook. In other words, like some people will say, the Bible, it's kind of has... They think of the Bible as something like, here's the answer book to all of life's questions. And in one way it is, but in another way it doesn't always answer some of the questions that we think we want it to answer. And so, for instance, like you don't open to page 1 of the Bible in Genesis 1 and it says, here's precisely scientifically how atoms and molecules, and you want to understand, the theory of relativity or gravitational pull. Like it doesn't anywhere in the whole Bible talk about those kinds of questions. And so we have this reality where the Bible talks about the creation story in Genesis 1 and 2 in particular, but I mean it's 2 chapters and it's mostly poetry, so it's not giving us like, it's not a video camera recording of how scientifically everything was created, because it's not intending to do that. In other words, it's like the goal of the Bible's description of creation, and I would argue that it's not wrong, but it's not supposed to answer scientific questions. It's supposed to answer big questions about life. Who created? Why was creation? Is creation good or bad? Those kinds of things. Okay, so I'll start with that, and then get into, there's like a history of how people have understood how the universe works. So at first, pretty much everybody would have generally assumed that there's the known universe, and because they were on it as human beings, and then there's the sun that revolves around the earth. So there was like the scientific understanding of how the world actually worked that said, here we are, and then the sun goes around the earth, but the earth is the center of everything. There also happen to be these random points in the sky called stars, right? And when you read through the Bible pretty much as a whole, you come across an understanding that seems to describe that. And so I'm going off more my scientific memory as opposed to my Bible memory here. There's a thing called the Copernican revolution, which is the idea that all of a sudden, after Galileo gets this thing called a telescope and people can look at stars and stuff in the sky, they start mapping out those stars and the movements of them. And long story short, what they realized through mathematical equations, etc., is that the Earth is actually going around the sun. Like, shoot, well, this changes everything. Mm-hmm. And there was actually like a significant challenge to people's theology and understanding, because what they thought was, well, the Bible said this, and what if the Earth is not the center of the universe? Because some places in the Bible it will talk about, the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, which kind of has a sense of like, well, the sun goes around the Earth and the Earth is at the center. That's only from their perspective. That's how they're writing it. So it's not technically wrong, but that just, people thought that the Earth was the center, and now all of a sudden the sun is the center. And then later on, till we are now, there's this idea that like there's a universe, there's a bunch of different galaxies, each star is technically its own sun, planets can revolve around them, et cetera, et cetera. So your original question is like, what does the Bible say about the Earth, whether it's flat or round? And I guess my best answer tag would be something like, the Bible doesn't fundamentally say anything about that answer, because it's not answering that kind of question. I think the Bible leaves room for what we understand the Earth to be like now, which is, there's a Milky Way galaxy, and in that galaxy is our sun, and we have planets, and we go around it, and we're all around this kind of thing. So I definitely think that just like the 7 creation days aren't describing every single scientific situation, the Bible isn't meant to answer scientific textbook questions, and thus it still can be true, while at the same time working fine with what we understand of how the universe, how the world works scientifically today. In other words, like, there's nothing in the Bible that says the Earth is not round. Like it's not like it's against that truth. Let me try to say another thing about this, and then I can see on both of your faces like maybe you have more questions about this. I haven't delved into I'm familiar with flat Earth theory folks, right? So I know that's like a thing that people say, the Earth is flat. In my reading of the Bible, I don't think there's like passages that are like, they're holding to this really clear passage, and anybody who says it's now round is just pushing back against that. Like, I just don't think that's the case. I would imagine that 200 years down the road, we might understand some more things about how the universe works, and I don't think that that's going to like prove or disprove the Bible. This gets a little philosophical here, but technically speaking, there's no way, like, science can give you evidence kind of for or against a certain belief system, but fundamentally science cannot disprove theology, can't disprove God, because science can only understand what we actually observe in our world. It can't, it can paint a picture of what we best think is happening, but it can't tell you what's behind, like what's underneath what we see that's happening. It's only, here's what we observe, and what can we guess based on that. Theology, or an understanding of God, or like a belief or something like that, that gets underneath the science. And so somewhere you always have to take a step of faith. Or, I know I'm going down a rabbit trail, maybe it's way more complex now. If someone says, I only believe in science, they still are putting their faith that what we observe about science and how we think the world works now is actually right. Because what happens in 100 years when their faith was misplaced there anyhow? So everybody puts their faith in something. Right. If you put your faith in science, it's just, if you put your faith that the world is flat, like, I would argue you're going against what seems to me to be reasonable evidence, the fact that we can go around the world in an airplane, so that wouldn't be logical to me, but you're putting your faith, and that's just a different version of me putting my faith in the fact that behind the created universe is a good God. Do either of you have any, I said a lot there, any other questions about that? Or like, what, I guess maybe I have a question for you, Tagg. What made you ask that question?
I don't know. I just see a lot of stuff online about, like, people will try to say that because the Earth is flat or because it's round, this is disproving the Bible, or it's proving science, or the other way around. Right. So I just wanted to know if there was anything in there that would Like, is someone to say, oh, the earth is flat, is that like going against something in the Bible?
Yeah.
Or
I was going to say this earlier. I'm glad you resaid that, because this might help a little bit too. There's a word, particularly in the New Testament, that we really struggle with, I would argue, in our world today, which is the word heaven or heavens. And the reason we struggle with that nowadays is because when most people think of the Bible and the word heaven, I think they picture clouds and fat angels with harps and, like, I don't know, toilet paper commercials or something, you know, like it's like this weird, like, out of body whatever. The problem is, most of the time in the New Testament, when the word heavens is used in the original Greek, it's plural, meaning it's not heaven, it's heavens, plural. And the reason for that is because the understanding of how the world worked then had a 3-tiered system of heavens. So the first one was the observable atmosphere around you. So like the kind of the first heaven, like a bird might fly through that. Like you can see it, it's like still close, or you see the breeze, or there goes a leaf, you know, through the air. That's the first. Second realm is kind of what we might think of as outer space, but they might have thought of as kind of like this dome where all the stars and the sun goes across, right? So it's a little different wording, but it's still like this next layer of out in the atmosphere, whatever. And then the third layer is like where the gods are, or like what I would say is like not where God is, because God is everywhere, but like this idea of like kind of what's behind what we see and engage with in our physical world. And so I say all that, Tagg, to say like they did have a different understanding of kind of what is up there, a different way of viewing that. I don't think I wouldn't say it's like scientifically wrong, in as much as like any current theory that we have is the best working theory that we have, and then that gets refined based on more information. But to me, that matters, because there's passages in the Bible that talk about, like, I think Paul says he like had this vision and went up to the third heaven. It's like, the third heaven, what the crap's that? You know, like it sounds like some but it's actually just like what we might think of as quote unquote heaven, you know, singular. Mm-hmm. That's what he's talking about, like this experience of interacting with God. Mm-hmm. So that's just more information about the differences between how they viewed the sky and how we view the sky. All right, I'll stop there. Fern, any?
I was just gonna maybe ask, like, what, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say this might be a dumb question, because there aren't really any dumb questions, but like, why do you think there might not be more scientific based, like, wording in the Bible? Like,
yeah, that's great. It's a really, really, really important question. I would say the reason why we ask that kind of question is because we, in the current vision of the world we live in, have been, ever since the 1500s, in what's called the, feels like modernist movement, people across the world, this is kind of when a rigorous study of science started, when we tried to like explore and analyze every single detail of how the world works. We kind of have lived in that world. Now the major problem with that world is there's a giant promise that if we could just dissect everything about how the world works, then all of a sudden we'd lead to human flourishing and goodness. And what's crazy is that the 1900s, so like between 1900 and the year 2000, at that point in time, as it is at every point in time, was the most advanced scientific understanding of the world, and by far more people died in that century than like any other century, between nuclear war and communist regimes and all this kind of stuff. And so I think it helps me to understand the fact that the Bible is answering better questions about human morality, what it is like to treat other people well, and stuff like that, because scientific questions alone don't get to the evil and sin in the human heart. In fact, what they do is the exact opposite. They just give us more power. So it's like, yeah, you can kill somebody with a sword, but you can kill a lot more people with a nuclear bomb. Like, it makes the unhealth like cause more problems. And so I think the Bible is not mainly scientific, because, and this is why Jesus, like, he might not come across as super smart to a lot of people, because he's not describing, as he's walking through Galilee 2,000 years ago, like, oh, by the way, you guys familiar with this theory of relativity, and, you know, here's space-time as a continuum, da-da-da, because it doesn't fundamentally solve the human evil problem. That's what the Bible's trying to fix.
Got it. That makes sense. That's helpful. I mean, I'm more interested in that, like, in those types of questions anyways. Like,
Right.
I'd rather
Right.
learn more about, like, the hard issues. But yeah, I think there's some people though who are drawn more to, like, scientific.
Yeah, that's exactly
they
right.
are
They think
interested
God,
in
like,
that.
well, the God of the Bible is dumb and old-fashioned because they don't know what the crap they're talking about. Like, that's the vibe you get. And I just think, how is it working? Like, how's that working out for you? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
are people flourishing? Is life good? Like, you know what I mean? And that the Bible has a lot of really, really helpful stuff to say. Because, I mean, if you read through the Old Testament, it's like, man, these people are a hot mess. And it's like, we want to avoid that by using scientific solutions. There's a whole AI train of thought here. Scientific solutions to make our life easier and more fun and less work and more ideal. But as we all know, if you're actually in a relationship with another human, you need to be selfless and humble and, like, there's core things that are actually the things that make that relationship better.